In our time, the biblical prophecies are being realized. As the prophet Amos said, they shall rebuild ruined cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink their wine. They shall till gardens and eat their fruit. And I will plant them upon their soil, never to be uprooted again.
Let's start by talking about Psalm 83. This is an Arab-Israeli conflict, a climactic concluding Arab-Israeli conflict involving those populations today. When they were written about 3,000 years ago, they were written as the Edomites and the Moabites and the Ammonites and the Termites and the Gigabites and the, I don't know all the names, but this is their modern day equivalents, and I'll be identifying them at length as I get going in the process. They are the nations that presently have been warring with Israel since 1948, 1967, 1973, and have upstarted with these terrorist organizations, the Hezbollah, Hamas, and Palestinians. They are Israel's most observable enemies today. 10 populations at the time they were listed. Their goal is to invade Israel. And it says they want to wipe the nation of Israel, destroy the nation of Israel, that the name of Israel will be remembered no more. And then they say in verse 12 of Psalm 83 that they want to take the pastures of God for themselves. So they want to take over the land of Israel and destroy the Jews. In the process, they want to wipe Israel off the map. Prophecy written 3,000 years ago that we'll be exploring. That would be the local war that Ken was addressing. The regional war would be Ezekiel 38. And there's 52 passages in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that talks about a Russian-Iranian-led invasion involving Turkey, Libya, and some other 9 populations altogether that form a coalition led by Russia that comes to invade Israel, it says, in the latter days. And they want to destroy Israel and take its great plunder and booty. So it's an entirely different motivation that bring these two together. And there are other differences between these two prophecies because some people do try to connect the two into one prophecy. So I'll be sharing some of the differences as we go through between those two prophecies that distinguish them one from another. But you see by their Old Testament names up there, you had Gomer and Meshech and Tubal and Togarmah and things like that. These are not the names of the Psalm 83 countries that I showed you in the prior map. And who they are, the general consensus is listed up there. Turkey, Iran, Ethiopia, Sudan. You'll see Tunisia's in there, Algeria, Libya, Russia, the southern steps of the breakaway Soviet Union and stuff, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Nuzstan, Grandstand, Takistan. They're all up in there in that battle. Now, as part of this distinction, I coined the term in my book Israelistine, an inner circle. Psalm 83 represents an inner circle of nations sharing common borders with Israel. There you see in the Pentagon, by their ancient names superimposed on their modern day equivalents, who we were talking about. Now observe that. Now the next map is, there's that Pentagon with the inner circle, but the Russian invaders, the Magog invaders, I call them an outer ring. So we have an inner circle and an outer ring, and you can see that they're not inside that inner circle. They are spread out all across the map on the broader Middle East and North Africa areas there.
I'd love to, Gary. What amazes me was back in March of 2008, I saw this total lunar eclipse over the Temple Mount. And I was praying about this, and, as you're very well aware of all the prophecies, about signs in the heavens and the sun turning to darkness and the moon to blood. And so as I was looking this, I went to NASA's website because they have 5,000 years of eclipses recorded. Because God created everything mathematically, they can do this.
Right.
Well, I noticed that there were 4 total blood moons or total lunar eclipses in a row in 2014 and 2015. And I saw it was like April and September or April and October. And all of a sudden, it's like the Lord told me, you need to put this on the biblical calendar. And so I did, and lo and behold, they fell on Passover and the Feast of Tabernacles in 2014, and then again on Passover and Tabernacles in 2015. I was blown away to see these 4 blood moons falling on the feast days, and I wondered how often does that happen? And I noticed it didn't happen at all in the 1800s, the 1700s, the 1600s. And so I went to the 1900s, and lo and behold, twice there were 4 blood moons in a row. And guess what years they fell? This is what we talked about, 1967 and 68 when Israel captured Jerusalem. And then right after Israel became a nation in 1948, they happened in 1949 and 1950. And so I thought this is an awesome sign. I mean, in Genesis 1:14, God said he created the sun and the moon and the stars to send signs.
Stay with us because this is going to get a whole lot more interesting. As you began to notice this phenomenon, let's now go into the solar and lunar cycles. There is a cycle that you looked at when you looked back at the history of solar and lunar eclipses. Tell us about that.
Well, I noticed that not only were these tetrad, now tetrad is 4 total blood moons in a row. You can have a lot of eclipses, okay, which are very significant if they fall on the feast days.
Yeah.
But I found clear back in 70 AD, at the destruction of the temple, there were eclipses on the Jewish holidays, the biblical holidays, all around the destruction of the temple. And in 32 and 33 AD, right around the death of Messiah, there were eclipses all around that time frame on the Jewish holidays or the biblical feast days. I even went to 1492 when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And in 1493 and 1494, there were 4 blood moons on Passover and Tabernacles 2 years in a row. And so I see this cycle where God is pinpointing significant events.
But not just events, but rather events in the life of Israel.
Exactly.
It's centered around the Jewish calendar and the events that bring Israel to another stage of prophetic development, shall we say. Well, this coming series of eclipses, both solar and lunar, that you're looking at now, and by the way, you've documented them. I think you've probably gone into more depth than anybody else. And I want to just say right up front, I congratulate you on the detail of your observations, because it's possible to kind of gloss over a few of these details. But in your studies, you've really gone into some depth and detail about how these things are going to happen.
Yes, and it's amazing to me, Gary, one of the most exciting things was, I don't know, I believe you're familiar with the super moon.
Yeah.
The super moon is when the moon, in its going around the Earth once a month, when it's at its closest point. Okay, if there's a full moon, it's called a super moon. So think about the odds of this. I know you love math as well as astronomy. You have to look at what are the odds of there being a full moon when it's at perigee, or the closest point to Earth. Then you have to look at what are the odds of this full moon also being a total lunar eclipse, okay, at its closest point.
Right.
It's a supermoon. Then you have to consider what are the chances not only of having a full moon when it's at perigee, having a total blood moon, but also having it being seen in Israel. This is increasing the odds.
Because not all eclipses are seen all around the world. They're seen on one side of the world.
Exactly. And then there's more. Not only in 2015, on the Feast of Tabernacles, when all the Jews are outside in their sukkahs where they can look up and see the stars, you not only have a total moon, okay, it is a total blood moon at perigee, so it looks 20% larger, and it falls on the Feast of Tabernacles. And it's seen in Israel, 2015.
2015.
So here you have a super blood moon on the Feast of Tabernacles seen in Jerusalem. in 2015.
Now, let's back up from 2015, because before that, you've got another series of eclipses that lead up to that incredible event.
Yes, in 2014, there's a total lunar eclipse on Passover, and then there's a total lunar eclipse on the Feast of Tabernacles. Following, on Nisan 1 of 2015, there's a total solar eclipse beginning the religious calendar year. 2 weeks later, you have the total blood moon on Passover, followed by another solar eclipse on Rosh Hashanah, followed by the super blood moon seen in Jerusalem as the grand finale in 2015.
Wow. Now, for those of you who don't follow the Jewish calendar and are not familiar with the feasts of Israel, there are 7 basic feasts of Israel, beginning with Passover, ending with Sukkot, or Tabernacles. And if you will, this procession of feasts, the feasts of Israel, are very meaningful. They're very symbolic, but they're also linked to heavenly events. Now, wait a minute. This must mean that God has a plan.
Yeah, thank
You know, the very strange weather that we're having around the world in New York, these incredible cold spells that we have had. Who had ever heard of the vortex in New York, right, before that weird weather? The incredible heat that Australia has suffered, the floods in the UK, and you name it, it goes on and on and on and on. There's no country that has been exempted. These very strange extreme weather events are going to continue, both in their frequency and in their severity. It's not that climate change is going to be here in the future. We are experiencing climate change.
This Arctic blast could see America reach its coldest temperatures in decades. Millions of people across a huge swathe of the country are being advised to hunker down while the so-called polar vortex does its worst. Minnesota could be hardest hit, with wind chills set to make it feel like an astonishing -50 Celsius. The polar plunge has struck unusually far south. In Oklahoma, the rotating pool of freezing air is producing rarely seen temperatures.
The inside of the New York to Washington, D.C. train iced up.
Try opening the window in Chicago and you'll get this. 35 below zero right in your living room. It's so cold, Lake Michigan looks more like a hot tub. The water outside Chicago warmer than the frigid air, and ice already forming along the banks.
Images of water turning to ice before it reaches the bottom. Parts of Niagara Falls have become frozen.
South as Texas and here in Elk City, Oklahoma, heavy snow is falling. This is unusual even for winter.
This weather combination that we're seeing right now with all of the snow and the cold is unlike anything that we've seen in decades. And I can't emphasize that enough. The cold...
Severe, pervasive and irreversible. Words used in a new UN report about the likely impact of global warming. Amid extreme weather worldwide, experts say the health, economic prospects and food and water sources of billions of people are at stake. It's everything from droughts to rising sea levels.
We're not in an era where climate change is some kind of a future hypothetical. We live in a world where impacts of climate change are widespread and consequential. We see impacts from the equators to the poles and from the coast to the mountains. There's no question that we live in a world that's already altered by climate change.
Powerful waves have continued to pound Europe's Atlantic coastline. 2 people are now feared dead in the French holiday resort of Biarritz after they were swept out to sea. The The town's famous promenade was battered during the night, leaving many businesses to pick up the pieces on Tuesday morning. The surge wasn't isolated to France. A large stretch of Europe's Atlantic coastline was hit by high tides, including Portugal and the Spanish region of Galicia. At least one person is now known to have died in Spain, with 2 others still unaccounted for.
An earthquake of around 7 magnitude has struck China's far western region of Xinjiang.
The earthquake that shook central New Zealand, including the capital, Wellington. The minute-long 6.3 magnitude rolling.
Thousands of residents woke with a bang this morning after a series of earthquakes rocked the state. Many have told of their fear and confusion as the shockwaves rumbled through the suburbs.
Tremors and shakes were felt right across Metro Adelaide.
We have very few this close to Adelaide that are of this magnitude, so it is more unusual.
South Carolina and Georgia got a bit of a shake last night. An earthquake with a preliminary magnitude of 4.1 shook homes and rattled residents' nerves.
It's the second largest earthquake to ever hit the state.
A 6.9 earthquake hitting off the coast of Eureka.
Already 4 aftershocks. Chile has ordered an evacuation of parts of its northern coast following an earthquake with a magnitude of 7.0 jolted an area 35 kilometers north.
Whoa!
Oh,
big earthquake.
Big earthquake right now.
Big earthquake. That's
a really strong shaker right now.
Very big.
I still feel it. Are you still feeling it? Yeah. Steady
it's
shaking
still
there.
shaking.
My hands are shaking.
A 4.4 magnitude earthquake has shaken Los Angeles. This is the second quake to hit the state in a week. This is the strongest quake to hit the city since the last aftershocks of the 1994 Northbridge quake. The United States Geological Survey said there could be a 5% chance of another strong quake within the next 3 days.
And David, I know you've had a chance to travel through the country into the center to see a country completely and utterly shut down in fear, as you reported last night. You visited a hospital today, and what did you see there?
Well, Erin, what we saw was something extraordinary. These doctors on the front lines of the battle against Ebola in the very epicenter of this outbreak. Taking incredible care to combat an unprecedented outbreak. Gloves? Ebola can lead to death with just 1 drop of infected fluids.
So that's why we take every possible precaution to prevent that.
Already dozens of doctors and nurses have died in this outbreak. Still, Dr. Stefan Kruger says he had to come.
I really did.
Great nations often reflect great character and purpose, but when their morals and values decline and decay, their days and years are numbered. When families are strong and teach their children true values and godly character, the nation is strong. But when states and nations neglect traditional family values and standards, their judgment day looms larger. How incredible it is when states and nations reject the 10 Commandments. We even prohibit posting the 10 Commandments in our public buildings. Amazingly, even many religious people approve of immoral, sinful conduct and behavior. Are we in the Western world headed toward a moral meltdown?
Want the devil to make it level. The New York-based Satanic Temple hopes to erect a 7-foot-tall Satan statue outside the Oklahoma State Capitol after a 10 Commandments monument was placed there in 2012. As you can see, children will be able to enjoy the statue because we were all wondering about that. And a spokesman notes that it will, quote, have a functional purpose, which is necessary as a chair, where people of all ages may sit on the lap of Satan, which is actually, what do you call that? Is that an anagram for Santa? So the lap is kind of consistent. For inspiration and contemplation.
sold my soul to the devil.
Barack Obama thanked workers at Ground Zero for helping to reconstruct the hollowed ground. The President and First Lady Michelle Obama signed one of the final steel beams that will be added to the tower, which will rise to a symbolic 1,776 feet when it is completed. Construction workers looked on as the President wrote, "We remember, we rebuild, we will come back stronger."
Do you not think an angel rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm? This work continues. The story goes on. And an angel still rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm.
Rome tonight, where Pope Francis is preparing to leave for that historic trip across the Mideast into the Holy Land.
Pope Francis is now on a whirlwind 3-day tour throughout the Holy Land. And on his trip, he will shake hands with religious and political leaders in 3 cities and deliver at least 13 speeches and homilies.
The Vatican flag raised over a Palestinian refugee camp alongside the Palestinian flag, a sign of how Pope Francis will inevitably be drawn into the old conflicts here.
Maybe one. We need healing, so much healing, and if somebody stretches out and brings healing like Pope Francis has the capacity to do, I think that is more than we need, than we can expect.
This is also an opening to bring all Christians together. Eastern and Western, Protestants, Catholics and Orthodox, and the ancient churches of the East, to say it's enough. The Lord asked very deliberately that we be one.
Pope Francis's trip to the Middle East, making his first pilgrimage to the Holy Land as the pontiff, beginning his tour by meeting with the King of Jordan.
His arrival, which turned into a rock star-like entrance, certainly here, folks in Jordan, very excited to see him, gave him a very warm welcome as he arrived. He's also bringing as part of his official delegation a rabbi and a Muslim cleric as well. Crowds were lining the streets for his motor.
Landing in Jordan, there's an earthquake in Israel, 4.1, and there's lightning striking the One World Trade Center in New York City. There it is. That is the One World Trade Center. A lot of people see it as the symbol of the New World Order or the One World Government. It was struck by lightning, as you can see, hit the spire, which is on the very top of the One World Trade Center, and that's controversial because a spire, that's what you put on top mosque. A lot of mosques have those on it. I mean, that's what they have. And President Obama had just put that beam, that one of the beams that went flying off the original trade centers, he had signed the beam with the Harbinger scripture, and they had placed it on the 104th floor of this building, which we know there's 104 holy books, considered holy books or texts by the Muslims. They have 104 books they consider holy. It was also 104 prisoners that were asked to be released during the peace agreement process that's been going on between Palestine and Israel. These are not accidents. So while the Pope is rerouting his trip and calling for the end of Israeli occupation of Palestine, bringing a Muslim with him and a Jewish rabbi, talking interfaithism or one world religion basically, as he's landing in Jordan, there's an earthquake in Israel and there's lightning striking the One World Trade Center.
An earthquake